Hello again, friends. For a very long time, I've been wanting to make a video that was similar to my Tim's History of Royal Paladin card fighting on my Vanguard blog. Links below if you're interested. Basically, a desire to have a massive retrospective on Vanguard discussing my thoughts, particular metagames, and how I felt then versus now about several facets of the game. With the release of Vintage in Dear Days 2, I'm actually to the point where I believe I can release this as a bit of a series. I plan on releasing several more videos prior to the release of Dear Days 2 to cover the expected meta, fun off meta deck lists, and covering what decks can reasonably be utilized with the limited card pool, and which are missing the key pieces they need to be playable. F's for Platinum Rush, which really only needed a Forerunner to be playable. Anyway, onto the video. This one is titled Vanguard, What I Was Wrong About Early On. The first thing that I was wrong about is why I was winning with jank. So, I found the secret to success pretty early on in Cardfight Vanguard, especially in the set 1-5 meta. I played a defensive / card advantage style that few other players were playing until Legion format. I guarded early, I guarded often, I guarded when I could reasonably prevent damage for a single card. I wasn't out there trying to take a bunch of early damage to get access to my counterblast or limit break. In some cases, I played decks that didn't care about counterblasts at all, such as Kage Royals. Now, I realized that the reason why Kage Royals won so many matches when I first started playing it, and you can see right here it says, after winning 10 games in a row, I was terrified with what I had created. That wasn't so much why I was winning. The reason why I was winning is because the opponents that I was playing against used the standard tactic of if my damage is less than 4, I'm not guarding your Vanguard. If my damage is less than 5, I'm not guarding your rear guard. And if you're attacking my rear guard, I just don't care. And the entirety of guarding and Vanguard, reduced to those 3 tragically suboptimal if statements, is the reason why this deck was winning. There was a reason for my success, and that was it. It wasn't that the Kage Royals deck list was better than the meta decks. It was not. If I were to take a Dragonic Overlord the End, Majesty Lord Blaster, or Tsukuyomi deck, guard the same way I was guarding when I was playing Kage Royals, against a Kage Royals deck also doing that, and play, say, 50 games, I would be winning more often with the meta decks than I would with Kage Royals. Because what was making Kage Royals win was the fact that everybody was playing really, really bad, and Kage Royals just happened to encourage playing really, really well. It had nothing to do with the power of the deck list, and that was my first major misconception. The second misconception I had was how many perfect guards you needed in early Vanguard. I was of the opinion in sets 1 through 5 that you wanted to have 4 perfect guards in every single deck. However, unless you are fighting specifically Oracle Think Tank with specifically a beefy Tom row with specifically critical triggers stacked on top of it, by and large, you did not need 4 perfect guards for most decks in sets 1 through 5, especially if you were guarding early, guarding often, and guarding whenever a single card would stop damage. If you are at 2 damage and Silent Tom is attacking you, you don't care. You just take the Tom hit. Now, it should be noted, this is speaking about a metagame with Barkle Band, Barkle Soul Saver, and Amon Gimmick decks. The former Band and the latter non-meta were the only real decks threatening huge numbers consistently in early Vanguard. And of course, again, Tom with his Guard Restrict gimmick would also apply here. If you think about a typical swing from a typical set 1-5 Vanguard row, you are typically able to drop 15k to 2 to pass, or 10k to stop any given rearguard row, barring triggers being passed to it. The point being that you're generally only required to drop 2 cards to effectively guard most given attacks in the set 1-5 Vanguard meta, making perfect guards functionally superfluous given that they aren't providing you any card advantage for their usage on average. Plus, if you don't have a perfect guard, but were guarding properly early on, if you do encounter a big swing, you can generally just eat it. What this means is that there is actually an optimal amount of perfect guards that you can run, and I'm just not convinced that 4 is the number for this particular metagame. Once we hit the limit break era, once things changed a little bit, and there was more guard restrict, and there were higher numbers on average, especially once Legion happened, although late limit break rides, everything that just made Amon level of power very common, that made it so that perfect guards at 4 were absolutely mandatory. So that was one of the things that I feel like I had a misconception about. And looking back at it now, I don't think I'm going to be running 4 null guards in many of my decks for this particular format. The next thing is stand triggers. Stand triggers have had a bad rap for a very, very long time. This is kind of what I'm basing my misconceptions off of. This is what I called previous tier list. I had stand triggers all the way at the bottom and draw triggers above stand triggers. If you were to ask me to look at that even in 2013, I would have cringed. But here we are. That's what I had posted. So for stand triggers, obviously I had crits and heals at tier 1 with crits above heals because crits were stronger, and I still stand by that. I had draws at tier 2, which is obviously wrong, but I think the most egregious error that I had made was having stands at tier 3. Stand triggers were much, much better in early Vanguard than people gave them credit for, especially when people were no guarding everything and a well-placed stand trigger caused 2 additional cards to be forced. As an example, imagine you have an 11k attacking rearguard and a 16k row. You attack with the 11k unit with its boost, they guard, you attack with your Vanguard, you get the stand trigger. You stand the 11k, give the power to the 16k row. Now you're swinging for 15k to guard, divided over 2 cards, and another 5k divided over 1 card. Given that the only reason they're guarding at this point is because they were big dumb and just ate all of the damage like it was candy, you're now poised to win. Of course, when evaluating things like this, it's important to consider how well these things performed in this particular meta. We saw this demonstrably proven by Kaden Kawakami's stand-focused Dragonic Overlord the End deck taking first place at the original Springfest in North America. The number 4 misconception is going to be draw triggers. Draw triggers had no business being tier 2. And I know that I'm an outspoken critic of draw triggers, and I have been for a very long time. I've written several blog posts about why draw triggers are the worst trigger type in the game, specifically because they have less shield when drawn into, making them the worst trigger to draw into. Likewise, when you check them offensively, you lose the bonus effect of a critical, stand, or heal, while getting, on average, the same amount of shield. Finally, if you are running more draws to increase the odds of hitting a defensive draw trigger, you still don't have a 50% chance to hit a defensive draw until you're at 6 draw triggers, and that's awful. You might be thinking, wait, Tim, were you wrong about that? And the answer is, no, I wasn't technically wrong about that. And this assessment down here, I'm correct that draws suck, but my misconception was having it at tier 2 originally. So it admittedly didn't take me very long to realize just how bad draw triggers were, but I do think that it's worth mentioning. So for number 5, Soul Saver Copium. Finally, the first real deck that I made was Barkle Soul Saver, prior to the Barkle ban in English. It featured Lohengrin as my first Vanguard, with Barons and young Pegasus Knights who both have the Doreen effect of gaining 3,000 power whenever you soul charge in the main phase. I refused to ever stop playing this deck, even after it long became obvious that it didn't function properly without Barkle. It didn't get anything to support it within Royal Paladin until Legion for the most part. And it got to the point where I started playing Greedy Hand, multiple copies of Greedy Hand, and 4 copies of Prisoner Beast in a Dark Irregulars mixed deck version of the deck. And it was at this point that I hit peak cope. The odds of me actually riding and pulling back my starter are abysmal, and my justification for it was, well, this deck doesn't have a Forerunner anyway, so what else am I supposed to do? Because Drangle was the only other starter for the Galahad ride chain, and we had nothing that we could use. So one thing I was wrong about was just coping so hard on trying to make this deck work. I really couldn't do it. There was nothing I could do to fix or salvage how much this deck relied on Barkle. Although I will say, if Barkle is unbanned, it's going to be an S tier deck and just as good as MLB Dote and Tsukuyomi, possibly better. We'll have to wait and see on that. However, the cope got even stronger when Legion did finally come out and we received some Genesis support. And this starter is Move to Soul, Soul Charge 3 if your Vanguard is in Legion, which gave my young Pegasus Knights, my Barons, and my Isaiahs all plus 3k, meaning that we had 18k young Pegasus Knights, 20k Barons, and 21k Isaiahs, on top of this giving me a guaranteed 6 soul for Thingsaver Dragon. So yeah, that was nice, except right when they finally gave me my deck back, you know what happened. They banned mixed decks. So just in time for the copium to end, the dream dies once more. Fair enough. So as you can see, I've had my fair share of misconceptions early on. This was why if you interacted me in 2012 and I was screeching about how Kage Royals was the ultimate tier 1 meta S+++ hyper championship deck of the ages because I was like 30 wins and 5 losses with it on Beyond because, well, if I'm winning, the deck must be that good. You now know why I thought what I did and why that was incorrect thinking. I'm still on the Soul Saver Cope train, though. If Barkle isn't banned for Vintage, that's going to be the 4th tier S deck, and we'll finally get to see whether Soul Saver was better than MLB or Dote. Well, I hope you enjoyed the video. That's all I have for today. Thank you so much, and have a good one.